Hey everyone, I'm going to look at another limit hold'em hand today from the World Series of Poker 50K PPC. We are getting to the late stages just before the bubble when we arrive at this hand, late on day 3. And this is a hand I had written down in my notes that I felt like I misplayed, and I'm going to go through it in Pio today and take a look because it does appear that that's the case. The way the hand went down, an early position player raised, and again, we're kind of approaching the money bubble, so definitely pretty locked down, solid ranges all around. I decided to defend the big blind with King of Spades 7x and got the 9-8-7 with 2 spades flop. I went for a check raise with the King of Spades in my hand. My opponent called. The turn was an offsuit 9. I bet again. My opponent called, and the river was a beautiful 7, and I bet for value and got called and won, and my opponent was visibly disgusted, which makes me think that he certainly had an overpair the way the hand was played out. So a very key hand for my stack at that stage of the tournament, but we're going to take a look today to see how I played it. One of the things I wanted to look at today was, I've had questions from students that often ask me, well, how should I look at things in PioSolver? Because it seems like if you make a change to one assumption that it makes a massive change to your strategy. And so when I was playing this hand, I don't really remember why now, but I had reason to believe that my opponent was just betting his range on the flop. And so I played my hand thinking that I was playing against a pure c-bet range on the flop. So the first thing I want to look at today is comparing the strategy when my opponent bets 100% versus when he plays some checkbacks on the flop. So in this situation here, this is the GTO range here, and villain is only supposed to c-bet this flop 65% of the time on this 9-8-7 against the big blind range. And down here, I have another version of the sim where villain just goes ahead and bets 100% of the time. It only makes a very, very small difference in terms of the EV for the in-position player here, so it's not a big blunder by him by any stretch of the imagination. But let's look at how we respond to both. So here I will pull up my response in both situations, and we can kind of look at the frequencies and compare them across the board. So what changes when he c-bets his entire range? Well, only a little bit in terms of folding. We fold slightly less, right? Because now we're up against a slightly weaker range, so 17% versus 19%. The main thing that changes, however, is that a bunch of my hands that normally would call on the top row here, 50% calls, 49% calls, and 31% raises, get shifted, and now we're raising 17% more of the time, and almost all of those 17% raises are coming off of the calling range. So now we can just take more thin hands that were calling and turn them into value raises when we're facing a wider range. My exact hand turns out to just be kind of a mistake, no matter which sim we look at. Here on the top in the GTO range sim, we can see King 7 offsuit here, and we can see that there's a sliver of raise from King of Spades 7, and if we look at the EV, we could see that it's not really a mistake to raise this hand, but I would say that the solver is preferring to play it defensively and play it as a call. And we can see down here, I was thinking in game that if villain is betting his entire range, then I could go ahead and raise this from value. But we see that that's not really the case. And the main thing I want to take away from this is, yeah, if you make an assumption like that about what villain's range is in one sim versus another, it does make a bit of a change to the frequency that you might choose in action, but it's not changing the pattern of the overall play. I mean, the same types of hands are still raising, calling, and folding. They're just maybe changing the frequency slightly. And as we see as we go further down the game tree, it's really not going to change very much at all. So if we go ahead and follow through in both these situations after I check raise and villain calls, and we get the 9 of hearts turn. In this second sim here, we see I'm betting again on the turn 79% of the time, and on this river, we'll see that I bet 81% of the time. When we look at this one, we see that I c-bet again the turn 83% of the time, and bet on the river 86% of the time. So a slight change, 3% more on the turn and 6% more on the river. Why? Well, because we check raise the narrower range in the top sim. So now my range is just a little bit stronger across the runouts when it comes 9-7. Whereas in the bottom range, I was check raising a little wider, so I'm going to have a little bit of a weaker range. But you can see this is not a big change in strategy, and we can see that the hands that are made up in this range are more or less very similar. So I think it's not really that important to get the exact details of all of the flop assumptions right in solver land in terms of trying to figure out what your strategy should look like. You're still going to learn a lot just from the big picture strategy that that you can find whichever assumption you make. And if you change one of the villain's ranges a little bit, it's not going to make that big of a difference. None of these things are going to make a big enough difference to not give you an underlying understanding of the pattern behind what you're trying to do. The other thing that was interesting about this hand might have been my decisions on the later streets. We can see that my turn decision is kind of a no-brainer. It doesn't really matter how I play the flop, but this hand now, if you do throw me in there with the King of Spades 7, it does look like in this first GTO sim that I could go either way on the turn, that my hand's a little bit too weak to keep betting for value twice more. And we can see when I do bet here, I'm getting raised a lot by this range here. Now, in game, Villain's range might have been tighter than what we're looking at here, but certainly he's going to raise me on the turn with a number of hands here. And this sim isn't even raising overpairs because it thinks it has enough value from just the 9x hands. And if we contrast that with this secondary sim here, and we see when I bet again on the turn here, pretty much the same pattern, right? He's raising all his 9x here that are trips. He's raising some semi-bluffs. He's not really raising for value with any overpairs. So probably Villain, I'm very likely thinking Villain did have an overpair in game and he played it fine. I obviously wasn't thinking that during the hand. I only got that information from his reaction at Showdown. I was hoping that he had one of these ace-high hands that I'm targeting. I thought at the time that having a king in my hand was very good for getting called down by ace-high. But let's look at an interesting blocker effect that this hand has on the river, which is that after betting the turn, and now we get the river, we get a very interesting situation with my hand, with my combo. Let's look at this sim because I do have more king 7 in this one by a slight measure. King 7 is a high frequency check on the river for the combos that we do have. And in general, we see that we check quite often when we hold a king in our hand. Well, why is that? Because it's a very interesting run out where now ace-high does not really have much incentive to fold, and a few hands got counterfeited. So Villain's going to have, both Hero and Villain are going to have some counterfeited hands like pocket 6s and pocket 5s. We're also going to have some missed semi-bluffs, like a lot of missed straight draws and king highs that are now basically giving up, and somewhere between a bluff catcher and just a fold. And when I have a king in my hand, I block all of the hands that I want Villain to have a tough decision with. And we can see that when I bet, the hands that I would be targeting to make like 0 EV would be these king X hands, king 6, king 10 off, king jack off, and some queen highs. We can see we do get Villain to hold 6s and 5s when we're bluffing, so there's some incentive to bet some bluffing hands here. We can see that we're bluffing with 6s ourselves. Where is that? 6s is bluffing some percentage of the time. But we're also betting for value with ace high. So in Solverland, this is a very funky run out where basically we can go for value against ace high, but when we have exactly king 7, Villain's actually supposed to bet some ace high himself. So when we check, look at what Villain strategy looks like now. He wakes up with those aces that played carefully. Obviously now they're thinking, okay, cool, I can go for value. He's even betting some ace high hands that are basically value, but also potentially making a chop indifferent, right? So you could see he's betting here for value with hands like ace deuce. And what is this bet accomplishing? Well, he's trying to make my ace highs 0 EV. Do we have a lot of ace highs? Not really, so maybe that's kind of I guess he's trying to get called by king high. It looks like it's just pure value, as we see that we do hero call with some king highs to try to catch a bluff from those counterfeited pairs and those queen highs that Villain can have. So where do Villain's bluffs come from? Well, pure bluffing with 5s, mostly bluffing with 6s, and then tempted to bluff with some queen highs. He doesn't have any jack highs because those all make a straight, but he can have queen 10 and queen jack. The solver doesn't want to bluff with these hands, but maybe a human would choose to bluff with these hands. So we can see he's actually value betting with these weak ace highs, trying to get called by these king high hands that I could hold. And we can see that in my land, if I do check with king 7, then it's just a pure check raise for value. So having that king in my hand makes my strategy a little bit interesting here, whereas other hands with a 7 in them would mostly just be betting, although there's a little bit of mixing from everything. It appears that having exactly a king in my hand is kind of an interesting card to have that I could have gone for a check. So not a hand that I feel like I played particularly well. Obviously, getting the good result of winning this large pot was certainly very, very helpful to my tournament equity. And at the time, I didn't think too much of it other than to write down the hand to study later. In retrospect, it does appear that I blundered this hand on a couple of streets, but all's well that ends well, and I was happy to catch that beautiful river card, which propelled me forward. In the future weeks here on the channel, I'm going to look at some hands from the stream table, as on the bubble and post-bubble, I did play on that table some. And we'll have some interesting hands to go over with a little bit more footage to look at. So this is a limit hold'em hand from deep in the 50K, and I managed to bungle my way to a nice victory here. And hopefully you guys learned some interesting things about the patterns here, and also hopefully put your mind at ease a little bit that you don't have to get every aspect of solver situation and the tree exactly right in order to learn something useful about the big picture pattern. You can change some assumptions, and the turn and river plays are not going to change very much. So let me know what questions that raises for you. Let me know what questions you have about the hand or the situation, and I'll see you guys in the comments and talk to you soon. Thanks.